In today's episode, we continue the conversation around ceremony with changing transitions in your personal life as well as in your professional career. We dive deep into the different roles that nurses advance and when you need to walk through these phases of ceremony for yourself so that you can be successful. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the Wellness Empowerment Project. I'm Trish.
And I'm Julie. We are two nurses exploring holistic healing and wellness practices to empower you to be the leader of your own health. Join us as we try out new things, or as we call it, weird shit, and have some fun along the way.
Welcome back to the Wellness Empowerment Project. This is Trish.
Hi, and this is Julie.
We think we had a great conversation with Ashley last week, and we really hope you guys enjoyed it as much as we did. It made us start to think a little bit deeper on specifically the topic of ceremony, not just ceremony in our everyday lives, but specifically ceremony in nursing. Julie, I don't know about you, but I definitely could see where we had ceremony in our profession, and then as things progressed, it fiddled out a little bit. And I guess I wanted to start by reiterating the importance of ceremony. As Ashley said, it marks a transition. So this is a big point in your life. I think a lot of us did go through a very ceremonial process when we became a nurse. I'm thinking of our pinning ceremony, the severance piece of who we once were. That changed before we started nursing school. Whether you went to a baccalaureate program or a diploma program or an associate's degree program, really that severance occurred when you were starting your nursing coursework and your nursing clinicals. And we're all in that uncomfortable liminal space as we all drugged through together all the classes, all the tests, all the different clinicals, and our initiation or rebirth was when we stepped into a new and crossing that threshold when a lot of us got our pin at our pinning ceremony. I think at some point people did little caps as well. We wore all white at our ceremony, but through that process, we all had a very clear vision of who we wanted to become and what being a nurse looked like for us, what being a nurse meant for us. And we took the action steps to get there. I think that's the big piece is that it had this duality. It wasn't just you applied to a program, you took the classes, you passed, and you graduated. I do think there is something different than some other college degrees. Because a lot of us had this emotional connection to our why of becoming a nurse. We had this desire. We had a vision of what we wanted that to look like. So we really had this balance of the emotional and action together that brought us through this space. Julie, what's your take on that?
First, I would just say that when we had our conversation with Ashley about ceremony, I had never broken down what those different aspects of ceremony were. Identified very much so about becoming a nurse and moving through those different phases essentially to come into the profession. And most people that become a nurse, they feel that there's some type of calling, there is an emotional piece to that decision besides other aspects of why did you become a nurse? Many people have emotional stories or personal stories around that decision. Over the years of study and practicum and clinicals and all of those different aspects of becoming a nurse, you really do move through those different phases of ceremony. When you start working as a nurse, especially as a new graduate, there is a lot of focus on new graduate nurses and supporting them and creating a lot of different programs to retain and support those nurses as they come in, which is fantastic. After that, or sometimes even alongside of that, when you start to look at different roles within nursing, charge nurse, a committee chair, a person, then my experience has been that those steps start to fray alongside with the need for fulfilling the role outweighs the process. What is the impact of skipping some of those steps and supporting those team members in the long run? I think that there's been recently less tolerant for lack of support as people are taking on more challenging roles within the profession.
Yeah, one of the first things I did, not the first thing, but pretty early on, whenever I took on a new unit, pretty much a review of the orientation program was one of the top priorities. And usually it needed a good chunk of revision. And we were essentially going through that process of helping someone become a same day nurse, an endoscopy nurse. What does that? What does that look like? In that evolvement. But I've also myself has been in the position where I walked on a unit one day and everyone called out and you're now the charge nurse. And,
Exactly.
yeah. Yes, I stepped up to the plate and we had a decent day. And then afterwards did the orientation after the fact. But I think that's probably the first line when a ceremonial process into becoming really crumbles. Because I think, first of all, it shows a lack of value when you're getting thrown into a position that is, in theory, a leadership position. Because a charge nurse role is a leadership position. You're coordinating a flow, you're making sure people have what they need. You're doing a lot of external and internal communication. And when you're fulfilling the role, because you just walked in that day and you are essentially the only option that was there. And then after the fact, we're checking off boxes, completing it. That's essentially what it becomes. It becomes a checkbox. It becomes something that you just did. And then we really haven't looked and defined the value of that role. What does it actually mean to be in that role? And what does that individual want from that process as well? Or not just want, but desire.
And do they actually want do they want that role?
Yeah.
Because some people don't. Some people, they've been a nurse for 20 years and they still don't want to run charge. That's not their personality. They don't enjoy it. And for some others, they do like it. I think that where nurse leaders or leaders can really step in is engaging with their staff in more intentional ways to figure out what people are actually looking for. That often just happens with annual performance reviews, whereas really you should be engaging with those conversations more regularly. I think that's really difficult, especially if you have a very large group, but then you have to figure out how to instill that into your frontline leaders and supporting them so they know how to have those conversations because you may not be able to get to 150 or 200 different people to have those conversations.
And I think that brings up, I think, two good points. We have a lot of hospital facilities that don't have frontline leaders. So that frontline leader may just be the charge nurse. And there are other facilities that truly do have an advancement process, which I've always been a proponent of having a nice advancement process. But looking back, a lot of our advancement processes at some facilities, they were very subjective. And others, they were a little more rigorous. But even in the ones that were a little more rigorous, the common theme between both of them were, did you complete this? Did you complete that? Essentially, did you check off these boxes? And then once you do, now we will say that you are a leader in this role.
And I think that
We throw a pizza party.
pizza's always good. Free food is always a nice thing, but it shouldn't be the only thing. We've talked a little bit about nursing having this push and pull of masculine and feminine energy and the need for both aspects to really be successful. In the age of efficiency and lack of resources, we have really leaned into the masculine part where checklists, I'm a proponent of checklists. I adore them. I really enjoy crossing things off. Sometimes I may have added things to my list after the fact just so I could check them off.
I've done that
Uh,
too.
I think that having checklists isn't necessarily a negative thing. I think it's a positive thing, but where we're lacking is the nuances and the in between and the conversations that coordinate alongside of those checklists. Okay, these are the things that we're looking for you to do in order for you to become X, right? But then what is the conversation alongside of those to dos so that when you actually become X, you become the charge nurse, that now you recognize, okay, this is a new role. And I saw that time and time again when people were stepping into a leadership role. Even as charge, they struggled a little bit with, okay, these were my friends, these were my peers. And now I have to go and I have to give them a new assignment. I have to change their assignment. I have to give them another patient. I have to push them in a different way that feels very uncomfortable because now you're coming from a hierarchical position rather than the friend position. When people are placed in some of these roles without going through the steps of this is where I was and this is what I want to become. So, what do I have to release in
Yes.
order for me to be successful? And how do I handle that?
And I think a lot of us who have made that transition on the same unit has probably had that struggle. I also think preempting that conversation on the front end, you're going to have that struggle, right? When you're making that shift from nurse to nurse leader, whatever way that looks like, you're always going to have maybe some pushback from people. You're always going to have some different stuff kind of fall in that you may or may not expect. But a lot of times, no one thinks of that until it occurs, right? So you're in this, oh gosh, now what moment? When really, before we start figuring out how to check off the check boxes, wouldn't it be nice if we had a conversation of what does being in this role look like to you? What does being in this role feel like to you? What things have you seen that you want to embody yourself? And it could be the way people handle situations. It could be the way someone's able to talk to somebody. It could be the way someone implemented a change or a process. It could be something different for everyone, but that's really the feminine energy piece that a lot of times is missing, the creativity, the expressiveness, the collaboration, and the flexibility, which we all need to be nursing. But then taking that almost as a baseline and then being like, okay, how can I embody those principles into this checklist that needs to be completed in the structure? How do I take this and put it into the structure? Take this and put it into the discipline, take this and putting it into the action and embody them both. So that after you complete an actual orientation process, that liminal space, and you're now crossing over, you're hopefully at that point feeling more confident, more courageous. You still may not have 100% clarity of what everything's going to look like, but for the most part, you'll have a lot more integrated into your own being to handle the different situations that come to play.
I think that taking that time and of that transition to really visualize what that new role looks like, what you would want it to look like, how you would want to embody it. What are some examples of people in that role that you really identify with and other things that you don't? That can really help shape the conversation about, okay, what are your needs as you're stepping up into this role? Do you need certain training or education around conflict management, some of those more challenging conversations with patients or family members, different pieces that you could identify just by taking that time to think about, okay, what is this role and how will it look when I step into it?
And I think to just take it one step further, Dr. Joe Dispenza, they speak of the manifestation principles, right? Thoughts and a feeling creates that emotion. That changes our frequency. So if we get that clear vision, because there may be some things that we just cannot teach, like with a sit down class. But if we start with what is that vision of how you want things to look, what is your clear vision for yourself, for your unit, and you really take the feeling that happens or that occurs in your body, which I'm hoping is a good one, an excited one, because you're making things better and you're going into this role wanting to make things better, wanting to create a better environment for you, for your colleagues, and yes, for the patients. But you really start to tap into that emotion and tap into that vision every day. And I know that's not something we talk about a lot or even put into play, but our brain, we have neuroplasticity, right? What wires together, fires together. We also talked about heart rate variability and different emotions having a different heart rate variability too. Those are all different frequencies. So if we do these little steps to integrate them on a daily basis, that could actually help us achieve our ultimate vision, our ultimate goal, our ultimate desire, paired with the structure of the how to and what's completed.
I think those small steps, those rituals of becoming do need to be reinforced during the process of becoming and then continue afterwards. I think that marking the transition is also a piece that may have been forgotten. When somebody's formally promoted, there tends to be a little bit of a ceremony, whether that's marked with getting a pin or with a pay increase or an announcement. It really depends on what your facility does, but it also really hones back to the individual leader within that group on how they actually do that ceremony and how big it is and how intentional it is. And that's where you're going to have a lot of variability between places.
But I think the most important word you used there was how intentional it is. I think at the end of the day, right? People know the difference between a very quick, hey, here's a quick announcement, here's your pin, congratulations, versus even if it's a very intentional, hey, let's go get a cup of coffee, let's sit down for a congratulations. I'm so excited to tell you this news. I think it's more about the intention and using this opportunity to create a bigger connection, noting the importance of it and not just another, oh, yeah, we just got to announce that she got this finally. And let's face it, I think because there's so much focus on the doing, and a lot of people usually know that they're in the process of doing and creating, that by the time they get it, it's a little lackluster. And I think we probably all can speak to that happening in different areas of our life. When you work towards a goal, and by the time you got it, you're like, all right, I did it. I think we check these boxes off for ourselves just as much as maybe the institutions that we're in or the people around us. Because it's taken so long to get there. By the time you get there, you're like, okay, I'm done.
Or you got there and it was very anticlimactic because you were already pretty much functioning in that role. And then it was just a title change.
Right. And I think that's is what misses from some of these, the charge nurse and the advancement model, is that it does become very anticlimactic because you've been doing it. You just finally got recognized for doing it.
Yeah. Having recently come out of a large hospital system, I think about this conversation and how important it is, and also really recognized the constraint that you have when you're just trying to do the work. And being a person that really wanted to connect with my staff, but I was really not good at celebrating. I knew that about myself. And so I had to really find the people around me that were good at it. Cause some people were like, they love to plan parties, they love to plan celebrations, and really elevating those people to a place of, okay, I need your help because I wanted to make sure that staff were recognized and appreciated and celebrated for all of those different transitions. I really had to create a tribe around me to get those ceremonies in place because I knew that was an area that I wasn't so great at. But just in the day to day, it can be really difficult to try to engage in some of those conversations with staff.
Oh, 100%. And I think you're touching on why it's so important for us to know our own strength. It was not a strength of mine either, as I definitely had to tag other people who were definitely a lot better at, you could say, party planning and celebrations than I was.
When I became an assistant manager, when I became a manager, I didn't have a formal orientation. It was a tough transition moving into that space and feeling like I had to figure it out on my own. And even now, as I've stepped into the next level, I got no handoff and I got no orientation again. And that's just the hard reality that we're facing in healthcare right now.
That's happened to me as well. You become so focused on the doing because you don't know how to do anything in that facility, especially if you transition and you're in a different facility. You're trying to figure out the doing and then the becoming and the creating, unless you have a lot of strong people around you, ends up on the back burner. And I think that's the other piece is a lot of times when you get into these different positions, there aren't a lot of people around you there. So you're over focused on trying to figure out the doing. It takes a while until you're really able to try to focus on the other stuff too. Or you try to focus on both of them, but it just becomes so overwhelming. You don't feel like you're doing any of it.
I might be in that space right about now because I do feel like I am trying to balance the doing with the other aspects of leading and the type of leader that I envision being at the director level. It is taking me longer to master and understand the doing, which is a bit frustrating. I have to remind myself to temper my own thoughts so that because in the end, eventually, I will get the doing. I will master those things. But the important piece is the engagement and learning the people, learning the culture, and helping to shape the culture into a positive place where I'm envisioning. So, what I haven't done is marking that transition. We've talked a little bit about where can nurse leaders help impact their team, but what happens when you need to really do it for yourself?
It's funny, I was actually thinking to myself as you were talking that you don't have to be even going to a leadership role to do any of this. You could start doing this for yourself in your day to day work, whatever role that is, envisioning what you want your day to look like, how you want your role to look like, what does it feel like to you. Anyone can really do it and hopefully impact where they are. But yes, exactly. How do you do that for yourself? And I think a big piece, that's where you have to be very intentional.
Step one, visualize, right? Okay, let's take it back to what Ashley taught us last week. Severance, release the old identity. And what is next? What is next? What does that look like? What are you hoping to accomplish? And identifying really what are some of the things that you would have to release in order to step into and embody the next aspect of who you want to be, and working through all of that uncertainty and all of those emotions that go with that.
I hope you don't mind me mentioning this, but I remember distinctly you telling me that before you made your transition, you had Reiki treatment done. And I really felt like that was your severance. You were clearing out your old energy and starting fresh.
Yes. Yes, I did do that. I reached out to our old friend Donna, who was on our second episode, and I said, "Hey, do me a favor. Can you do a Reiki session on me?" And I did really feel like I needed to clear out just some of the grief. And there was some grief with the change, because the change was not something that I had envisioned for myself for a very long period of time. And then an opportunity came up, and it was like, I'd be crazy not to take this opportunity. I did work through some of those emotions during that session, and that was a clearing. So thank you for reminding me about that.
Yes. I just think it's a nice example that your severance, it doesn't have to be I'm cutting out people, I'm cutting out this. And yes, there may be some of those factors, but what could be a Reiki treatment? One of the severance ceremonies I did was in a cold river and just this washing away and cutting off from that perspective. But with that said, I think we all have the liminal space down, which is that uncomfortable space, right? Where we're figuring out what's next. I was listening to another podcast and I actually left this podcaster a message because she was talking about the courage it took for her to get on her podcast and just to start it. I was telling her my mantra for this last, I don't know, 6 months or so before I really made my own personal transition. It was courage, confidence, and clarity, because you need the courage to take the steps that you're unsure of or that you're not comfortable doing. You need the courage to venture into something new. The confidence will come the more you dive into that uncomfortable, and then you'll become more and more confident in what you're doing. And then the more you keep doing that, you'll get the clarity that you desire. And I feel like that's the liminal space. It's being uncomfortable. It's taking those courageous actions to the point where you build up enough confidence that you're ready to essentially take that final step into your own initiation.
My question for you is around that ceremony, that incorporation, and defining that transition, because I think that there's a lot of focus on, in my situation, is that I took this new job that marked a change in my life, that marked a change in my schedule, my environment, the people that I was surrounded with. But I think there's a lot of attention on that piece marking the transition, whereas I feel like I am still in the liminal space. I have not gotten there yet. And maybe that's an area that needs more exploration as to figuring out that point where you feel like you can mark it. You've embodied that. How do you celebrate it, especially if you're doing it for yourself?
I think there's two pieces to this. One, that liminal space can be a long time. I know we all like to have a clearly defined start and stop, but it's use the period of time that you are in the longest. When I did an active ceremony for myself, you could argue I started the severance process and then I finalized the severance process, but the liminal phase started and overlapped a little bit. For me, the liminal space ended when I just decided, you know what? It's time. It's going to end because I can make that decision. And I think it's twofold with that, right? Yes, there are going to be experiences that you completed your orientation or you completed something and you are being initiated in, and that is clearly defined. I think that when we are creating our own, I think we can take that base of that decision of when do we feel like we're ready to step into that. Because this ready to step into it and that initiation doesn't mean you've done it already. It means that you are committed to embodying it and taking those action steps to move forward. I guess to make this a little more clear, when I actually did my ceremony, I first did a pre-severance ceremony. And that's when I came up with my mantra, courage, confidence, and clarity for myself. And then before we actually had a formal process, we came up with this intent statement. My intent statement was I am an embodied feminine leader, confidently claiming her novice power aligned with ease, grace, and self trust. Because for me personally, I only knew how to be successful by hard work, by pushing, by doing. And I wanted to learn to embody something differently. So I personally went on my ceremony. I went away. I wanted it to be silent for that period of time. I completed my severance in the water. I allowed myself to stay overnight. I did it at a campground. I was absolutely miserable. And I'm a pretty avid camper too. So there was no reason for it, but it was rainy. It was yucky. I did some things in the liminal space. And then I got up that morning and I was like, I just had loose ideas of when I wanted it to end. But I essentially got up that morning. I was like, you know what? I'm done. I'm taking a nice shower. I have some soap, by being shower. There was a water bucket. And I use the word shower very loosely, but I became clean. And I did. I shouted out my intent statements right then and there. I finished journaling. I hit up a coffee shop on my way home. And that was my initiation. And my rebirth started when I decided it restarted. And then after that, it was what action steps am I going to put forth that are linked to my intent statement that shows that I've done the action embodying with that vision. Creating this podcast was the big thing that completed it. So my plan was after I came out of the initiation was my plan is I am going to keep reciting that statement every single day to keep it in my field, auditory, visual, emotional. And I started taking steps to building the podcast because a lot of what we did here was helping me to embody that leader I wanted to become. Now, we still celebrated the launch of the pod, but I didn't wait to initiate myself until after we launched the podcast. The initiation, the stepping in, the rebirth happened before.
That's a really great story because honestly, I haven't done anything like that. There's a part of me that's tied to a lot of the masculine aspects, like those checklists. And I would like to have a timeline. And that liminal space feels frustrating to me, but also recognizing some of that work will help shape me to become what I want to become in a way that is intentional, that is clear, and will actually get me to that space. It's not a checklist, so to speak, but it is a way, it is a path for me to get to where I want to go. So leaning into that flow, I do recognize the value of stepping into that. It's just uncomfortable for me. I've done a lot of uncomfortable things in my life. And so I know that I can do it and that this is just another way for me to lean into that discomfort and to grow as a person to get me to where I would like to be.
If someone told me 5 years ago that I would have done that, I would have told them that they were absolutely bonkers. I would have been like, no, we're not doing it. Julie, I have a Lean Sigma green belt. I'm all about efficiency and process improvements. Okay. So
I know.
very much. The thing is, the checklists do provide a security blanket, right? It gives us that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? It was security. But if we're going to grow and we actually have to do new and different things and we actually have to get out of our comfort zone.
Yes, I think that I will still have my checklists that
We're
that
not we're not
that
telling anyone to get rid of the checklist. You guys still have your check. I still have the checklist right here, mind you. I still have checklists.
so I think that that is something about myself that I know helps to keep me on track. And so I just I have to find that balance of the flow back and forth between my checklists because in a way you also had your own checklist. You said that mantra to yourself every day. and
Yes.
you checked it off every day. That's where I'm very curious about those nuances between both aspects of becoming what you want to become, if that makes sense.
The discipline versus the devotion.
Yes, because
Those
I can get
words.
really good at the discipline.
I know I've been very good at that discipline too. And you know what? I feel like a lot of us, if we just release and dove into some of these different practices, our discipline will help us to do them every day. It's then that transference into making it more devotional. And that transference to making it more devotional is releasing some of the rigidity you put around it.
And that is something that I have been starting to look at more and more. Devotion to myself, devotion to my body, devotion to my life, my relationship. It is really more about that concept of self-care, but really about loving who you are as a person. If you bring it back to the workplace and engaging in different conversations with your team to help them become. There is a devotion there as well, right? Because if you're in a leadership position, or even if you're not, if you're showing devotion to your team, you are helping them to grow and become who they want to become.
I think if anyone takes anything out of this, the most powerful piece is that you can decide when you want to cross the threshold into your own initiation. You can sit in that liminal space as long as you want, but at the end of the day, you have that choice. Once you create that vision and you're really feeling it, you're ready to do it, be your own self initiate. And then you can take those action steps. And don't forget to celebrate at the end.
Yes, don't forget to celebrate. That is for sure.
Especially if you're doing your own. I don't think you can pass off your celebration. If you're doing your own.
I'm going to have to figure that one out.
That is a big thing though. When you complete your own initiation, really to come back and have others see you. It doesn't have to be a huge, massive party. It could just be about sharing and talking about the experience with a couple close friends, because it will be an experience. It will be changing, and
Yes,
enjoy that moment until you have to sit down and say, what action steps am I going to do to show that I've embodied this fully?
Yes, there was the aspects that Ashley had talked about of witnessing and
Mhm.
accepting. That is another piece after the ceremony to incorporate that witnessing and that acceptance and figuring out how to do that and put that into your own place.
And that's now tying in the masculine energy. So I think if we take this from a process of change standpoint, we have the preparation and action. Then there's maintenance afterwards. But for the most part, when a lot of people want to institute a change, they start right at the action phase, right? They do that action phase, then they fail because they went right to action. They didn't spend enough time in preparation. And I look at it from that place as well. When we're in this doing space, when we're in this checklist space, that's that action phase. But the question is, did we put in that preparation piece? I see the ceremonial process as that preparation piece.
Yeah, we didn't really talk about the ritual aspects to this and how that is incorporated into your ceremony. I see it as even continuing that maintenance phase and really embodying wherever that transition is, that you continue those rituals. We are going to have Ashley back on the podcast to dive deeper into ritual. I'm going to be doing a little bit of my own work, preparation for that conversation.
Thank you guys so much for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed listening to this as much as we enjoyed recording it. If you haven't listened to Ashley's episode from last week, please take a listen. We can't wait to have her back on with us. Enjoy your day. Thanks for joining. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow, subscribe, and share with a friend. Want to learn more about a specific topic? Drop us a line on our website and we can explore it deeper with you.